start off, I have the honor to invite to the podium Honorable Generoso Calonge, Consul General of the Philippines to Chicago and the Midwest. Sir.
Magandang gabi sa ating lahat. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, thank you all for coming. The topic we're having today deals with a burning issue, a very interesting topic called immigration. If you go to New York, you will see there the Statue of Liberty, and around that area there are statements that are very nice. The idea called the United States is not merely a physical country, but the thought of a place where the oppressed, the weak are supposed to be welcome. There's a phrase there, give us your hungry, things like that. It should be memorized by every person who knows the English language. But with recent developments, I think the concept of a United States is not the same as we know it, since we of the USCIS in Chicago, and an old friend, Maria del Carmen Rodriguez. Good to see you again. This is your third time here?
Oh, maybe the fourth time.
Yeah, fourth time. So in Tagalog, we call it Suki. You're a Suki. Suki means a regular customer. Well, we are your customers, actually. Miss Manda Walters, thank you all for spending your valuable time with us.
Apropos for us to go back to that quote that's displayed at the foot of the Statue of Liberty, which reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." It's actually from a poet named Emma Lazarus. That's not a coincidence because as they will, they won't steal your thunder. They will explain to us later on who Emma is, because Emma has reincarnated digitally. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and pleasure to welcome Mr. Chris Bryan, Deputy Director of the USCIS in Chicago. Sir.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Consul General and staff, for having us here. Very honored and very delighted to be here. I wanted to mention that I am the Deputy District Director of USCIS here in Chicago. My boss, District Director Thomas Chapa, unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight, and he sends his regrets. I think he really would have liked to have been here, but I think he was also happy to send me in his place, if for no other reason than because I've only been here in Chicago in this position for the past 2 weeks. And really, it's not so much that I came to Chicago, it's that I came back to Chicago. So very little about myself. I actually started my career with the government with the, at the time, Immigration and Naturalization Service Chicago Asylum Office back in 2000. Was there for a few years. Really enjoyed the asylum work and went to headquarters for a number of years. And I worked in different parts of the agency in Washington, D.C., Arlington, Virginia, Fairfax, Virginia, Queens, New York, New York, New York, and finally now it's great to be back in Chicago. So what I thought I would do is speak a little bit generally about our agency, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the things that we do, a little bit about how we're organized, and then certainly glad to take your questions during the Q&A period. USCIS is a component agency of the Department of Homeland Security. We have been since 2003. Our founding date was March 1st, 2003, when the Department of Homeland Security was created. We are one of what we call the legacy INS agencies. The other two are Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as you'll hear from Ms. Walters later, and also U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So ICE concentrates on enforcement, Customs and Border Protection. They work at the ports of entry, controlling who comes into the United States and who doesn't. USCIS's mission is really to grant immigration benefits. And our top two, by far, are naturalization. So folks who are here as permanent residents, they have a green card, they've satisfied the requirements, and they can become United States citizens, and also green cards. So we do adjustment of status for individuals who have a basis to be residents of this country on a permanent basis. So we're organized into directorates, and the largest being field operations. And that's really what our office represents, USCIS field operations, field office operations. And other directorates include service center operations. So if you've had contact with our agency, you may have dealt with one of our originally 4, now 5 service centers, and they're located in Nebraska, Texas, Vermont, California, and now Arlington, Virginia, the new Potomac Service Center. And the service centers really handle whatever applications and petitions we can adjudicate to completion on paper. Generally, these include things like alien relative petitions, Form I-130. We also adjudicate those in the field offices too, but at least initially they'll be looked at a service center. Employment authorizations, so work permits, are generally handled at the service. And at the field office, again, we really deal mostly with making people permanent residents via adjustment of status, and also making new American citizens through naturalization. So we are District 14 within USCIS field operations. We're located in the Central Region, and the Central Region is headquartered in Dallas, Texas. And our district, District 14 Chicago, consists of 2 field offices. The first is Chicago, which has jurisdiction over really northern Illinois, and the Milwaukee field office, which has jurisdiction over Milwaukee and southern Wisconsin. I think it actually has about half the state. Between the 2 offices, Milwaukee is very small in comparison. I think we have about a dozen immigration services officers working there in Milwaukee. And I had a chance to visit last week. Great place, great location. Here in Chicago, it's a much bigger office. We have something like 80 odd officers on board, and they're organized into different branches. So we have an adjudications branch, which does mostly the green cards for adjustment of status. We have a customer service branch, and if somebody needs to make an appointment in person to speak with an officer to inquire about their case or to ask for information or certain services like emergency authorization to travel, they would come into our office and they would be dealing with our customer service unit. And we have not 1, but now 2 citizenship branches. So we used to have the 1, and we've really expanded our operation there. So we have a new branch chief over a 2nd citizenship branch. So that's really what we do as an office. I wish I had numbers to kind of give you a sense of the volume, but I'm really still learning. We are one of the bigger field offices for USCIS in the country, and very proud of that. And I know our folks work very hard, but I did want to speak also about a few of the challenges and issues that we've been facing this year in particular. You may have heard talk of our electronic immigration system, ELIS. This is a system that we've had for a while, and we've been incorporating different benefits into it over the years. The first benefit that really affected field offices went into it earlier this year, and that's the N-400 application for naturalization. As with the transition to any new system, there were bugs, there were some setbacks, but we've certainly worked through them, and the system has worked very well. That said, it has had an impact on our cycle times. Our agency goal is no more than 5 months for an N-400, 4 months for an I-485 application for adjustment of status, and we're not meeting those goals currently. It's more in the neighborhood of about 8 months for both. And it's not just because of the Ellis system. We've also experienced an increase in receipts. We had a new fee rule that became effective December 23rd. So on some forms it was a modest increase in the filing fee. Others it was greater. But whenever we have a new fee rule, there tends to be a rush of applications. So certainly this spring and summer we will be working through that to really reduce our cycle times, hopefully to what we have set for ourselves as an agency goal. And in Chicago in particular, I mentioned that we have about 80 some odd officers. Right now we have a few vacancies that we would really like to fill. You may have heard of the hiring freeze. That hasn't really affected us insofar as we have been able to have our core mission essential positions accepted from the freeze, but still government hiring being what it is, we've been carrying more vacancies than we'd like. So we certainly intend to really staff up. So that's really kind of my presentation of the agency and the office and the things that we're sort of working through, and I look forward to your questions.
Ryan? Oh, Ryan Christian, sorry. All right, so let me now welcome to the podium Señora Maria del Carmen Rodriguez.
Thank you. Good afternoon, or is it good evening? For those of you who don't know, yo soy Maria del Carmen Rodriguez. I am the Community Relations Officer for District 14. I am the one that goes out into the community and answer questions and conduct presentation. That includes half of Wisconsin. You can, there's questions available that you have answers to. There's also, you can get the forms, downloading the forms. There's also study guides. You can go online and study for the examination. They have practice exams, which are fun. I do that with my attendees whenever I do these presentations at libraries, churches, and other places. Have them go through the examination. It's 25 questions per each set. The other thing I also want to bring to your attention is that a lot of the materials are available in different languages. So we have a multilingual link as well. So you can go to that page, and I believe there's about maybe 40 different languages. Not everything's translated, and Tagalog is one of them, okay? But if you go to the link, you just press on the button, and it'll take you directly to the page that contains those information in that particular language. I mean, there are just a variety of different languages that are available, and we keep trying to update the information as much as possible. And those questions for the naturalization examinations, those are available in the green card has a background that's in green, and with the Statue of Liberty, they have certain items that are embedded into the card. The EAD card, the Employment Authorization Card, has a red background and has a different image. They're trying to prevent it from being counterfeited, because that is a problem. You know, there are people out there that will counterfeit these green cards and employment cards and then sell it to individuals. So that's something that we're always conscious of and we're trying to prevent. Now, with that in mind, the other thing that we have to keep in mind that there are a lot of scammers out there. A lot of frauds committed. And some of them are notary public, because for those who are from South America and Mexico, they are considered administrative attorneys. But here they're not. What is it, $25 to just get the stamp and the license, and that's it, right? So a lot of these people act as if they're attorneys. So we have a program, and we refer to it as UPEL. It's the Unlawful Practice of Immigration Law. So we go out into the community and we let people know that you have to be aware of these notary publics, accountants, as well as travel agencies and the friendly grandma on the corner who helps you fill out these applications for individuals. They'll make these outlandish promises that they'll get you your citizenship paper or your green card. You just have to pay them this kind of money, and they'll make sure that they'll submit the application and don't worry about it. And what happens is they don't do that. We've had people call the office and say, I haven't heard anything about my case, and there's nothing on record to show that they've even filed. Why? Because they went to one of these scammers. And sometimes they cost a lot of money that's taken from their own pocket. I had one case, somebody had called a few months ago to complain about phone calls. They've hijacked our USCIS phone number. So when you look at when you read to see who's calling, you're going to think it's the U.S. government, Citizenship and Immigration Services, when it's not. These individuals, we don't know where they were calling from, but they told this gentleman that he had to pay a certain amount of money in a form of a gift card, that he needed to go to a money order store so that it could be transmitted to another store in Florida. Well, guess what? We don't do any of that. We never call the applicant, first of all. We never make any phone calls. There might be exception if the person initiated the contact and were responding. Maybe that might be the case. But we normally never call anyone, nor do we threaten anybody over the phone that you must pay this amount of money in order to avoid being deported or removed from this country. So this happens a lot. And the interesting thing about this gentleman, he got transferred during that phone call to somebody that actually spoke his language. So he's thinking this is the real deal, and he has to pay this money. So he did, but he held back the code because something told him something's wrong. So I asked him, well, what went through your mind to make you not provide that code number to that individual? He says, well, I have a green card, so I didn't understand why they were going to deport me. So I thought, okay, that makes sense. So he called me to report it. I referred the information to our fraud unit, which, by the way, has grown over the last decade. We had just a few officers that were handling fraud cases, and now we have, I want to say, close to 15, is it, Brian? I mean, it's doubled, tripled in size. And as officers, we're trained to track cases that might have fraud indicators, where we suspect that they might be lying or they've committed fraud in trying to seek a certain benefit. It could be marriage fraud. It could be a variety of different types of indicators. And we'll refer those cases to the fraud unit. It's their responsibility to follow up on those cases, and they will go out and make home visits. They will visit these individuals. It could be in a business situation. Maybe there's a business that is sponsoring an applicant, and they'll find out that it's just a storefront, that there really isn't a true business. It's just a scam in order to get a benefit that they really do not deserve. So the fraud unit is constantly out there investigating our cases that we have referred to them. So the one thing I want to bring to your attention is we really want you to be aware. We want you to warn your community that there are people out there that will take advantage of them. And if you allow them to take advantage of you, it's going to hurt you in the long run. So we do have information about the, UPIL online. It's the flyer that I have for that is wrong help can hurt you. We don't want people to be hurt by these scammers. The other thing that you can do, if you suspect that there's any fraud happening, if there's anything that just makes you wonder if it's on the up and up, you can also contact the Federal Trade Commission to report it. You can contact the Illinois State Attorney General to report that and provide them with a lot of information. Because they've taken the steps to go after these people and prosecute them and sentence them to prison. There is many examples of what the fraud officers have done that have brought many offenders in the courtroom to be prosecuted and sentenced. So that's something you want to be aware of and more in your community. And the other thing that we've done to combat the fraud is we have a program where we provide, not us ourselves per se, but the Department of Justice, but we're part of the review team, where organization, a community-based organization based on their charitable status, may apply for recognition as a DOJ organization and have their representative receive accreditation. What this means is they are allowed within a limited scope to provide legal counseling to people in the community. And what you have to keep in mind that this service is provided to those individuals that are low income or indigent individuals. They may not have enough money to go to an attorney to seek legal assistance. These people are the ones that might go to the friendly grandma or to the notary public or the accountant and get, basically swindled, by these individuals. But if they go to these community-based organizations, and there's a list of them listed in the DOJ roster, you can find the representatives, the accredited representatives list, obviously, U.S. passport. Now, there was a question posed earlier that was asked about citizenship, dual citizenship. The United States is aware that dual citizenship does exist. We ourselves, when you are sworn to become a citizen, you're giving up loyalty to other countries, but we don't monitor you once you become a citizen. We're not going to say you can't, reject your citizenship from your other country, but as USCIS officers, what we do tell you is that as a policy, the United States does not recognize dual citizenship. We know it exists, but we're not going to enforce anything. We're not going to tell you, we're going to, go after you. We're not going to do that. I think Brian had said it in a much better way earlier when we were having this discussion.
One way to put it is that the United States requires a new citizen to take an oath of allegiance to the United States, but we don't require a formal renunciation of the prior citizen. And as Maria mentioned, we're not following up after the fact to see if the person has remained a citizen of their original country. That's really up to that country.
And there are countries that do recognize dual, they accept,
Well, I can add to that from the Philippine standpoint. There are those of us who were born with dual citizenship at birth. For example, if a Filipino was born after January 17, 1973 in the United States, and at the time of birth one of the parents was still a Filipino, he will forever be a Filipino. So the child is not at fault.
Right.
He was born with it. So how can you deprive him or her of something that he or she was born with?
Right, and as Brian said, we don't enforce, we're not going to force anyone to renounce their citizenship. We simply, when the oath is given, is that that you be loyal to the United States, and it's in the oath of allegiance. So, but I know it's there's other countries that follow the dual citizenship, and then there are other countries that don't even recognize U.S. citizenship, and they just only recognize their own. So it just depends on the country. It really does. It depends. So anyway, I just wanted to just let you know that there's so much information out there. There's so many, information about visas, humanitarian visas for those who are victims of other crimes, victims of human trafficking. That does exist. It's here in the United States. It's all over the country. It's all over the world. It's big business, and unfortunately, there are people that fall prey to this, to these individuals that trade in human beings. That's another area that we are very working closely on. I know ICE is very involved in that with other law enforcement groups. So there's just, a lot of people, when they think about immigration, they just think in terms of the green card or citizenship. There's so much more, so much more. And all that information is online. Everything's online. If you have any questions, like you have a concern or you're confused about something, reach out to me. I am more than happy to provide you with information or directions where you can get the information. And if I'm not able to answer the question, I try to find out if I'm able to get the answer, and I'll get back to you. I try to be as transparent as possible. I try to include everybody, regardless of where they've come from, because I think it's important to share this information with everyone. And all I expect is that for you to turn around and share it with everybody else that you know, because that's the best way, word of mouth, right? Okay. Well, I'm going to end my presentation and turn it over. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. So, damas y caballeros, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, before I introduce to you our next speaker. Actually, 91 days ago, this particular need of ours to get touch base with the United States, DHS, ICE, started because actually, not exactly 91 days ago. That was when, we all know, President inaugurated. A couple of days after that, I think in January 25, 2017, when he signed 2 executive orders on immigration. Well, we can give you the exact title of that, but basically that kind of raised a lot of commotion, fears, anxiety among the immigrant communities, not just the Filipino Americans, but so many other minorities in the U.S. So, in fact, for this event this afternoon, we tried to invite the Office of Attorney Manigan, Lisa Manigan, Attorney General of Illinois, but I think one reason is that they won't be able to attend, and I think partly because of something that's in that executive order that we would like to ask our next speaker to elaborate. Anyway, without further ado, again, I'd like to welcome Ms. Amanda Walters. She is the Public Information Officer of the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement in Chicago. Sorry, but before I give the microphone over to her, after her presentation, I would like to invite the 3 of them. We will arrange 3 seats in front so that the Q&A would be easier to just pass the microphone.
Sure.
Okay, thank you for having me here today. As you said, Amanda Walters. Actually, I'm the Community Relations Officer, so I have a similar role to Maria. Our Public Information Officer, Gail Montenegro, recently migrated to Immigration Court, so we don't have her anymore. So I'm trying to fill in some gaps, and I can definitely refer to FAQs and the language itself. There's just some restatement of some of those ideas I already mentioned. So the first point of interest, I thought, is the Alternatives to Detention, or ATD program, that continues to be on a case-by-case basis. That's right there in the executive order. And I don't really have too much else to say about that one, because I personally I'm not one of the ATD officers, and I'm sure they have other guidelines, and I think probably our lawyers and officers would probably have more information if you're looking for that. The next is ICE will make individualized custody determinations in every case, prioritizing detention resources on aliens subject to expedited removal and aliens removable on any criminal ground, national security, or related ground, or for fraud or material misrepresentation. So what that's saying is that ICE can basically detain anyone for those reasons. So if they're subject to expedited removal, though that wasn't clearly outlined in the executive orders yet what that means. They're still working out what expedited removal means. That's not in place yet. And then the other ones, national security, criminal, fraud, right? And those things we'd already touched on. The next one mentioned is that there's going to be uniform written guidance and training for processing unaccompanied alien children. So that doesn't mean that there isn't currently guidance in place. There is, and they're very well taken care of. And it's under a different arm even. It's Immigration and Customs Enforcement may maintain their immigration file, but they don't maintain care of those children. They're cared for by the IRR. ORR, Office of Refugee and Resettlement. So if you have questions about that, I'm happy to take those down and find out more, but that's the office that oversees that. Next, there'll be an increased review of fraud detection, deterrence, and prevention measures. So like Maria said, that's a critical piece, and it's so rampant, and it's for the benefit of the people, for the benefit of those who would like to immigrate to this country. We really need to crack down on that. So part of the executive order said, hey, we're going to do whatever it takes to increase the review of all of those cases. The next one, parole authority, will be used sparingly and only because of demonstrated urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. I don't know, in my experience, another piece of that is resources. So if there's detention space, but for urgent humanitarian reasons and significant public benefit. So. And then next, this one I think you'll really have an interest in, is the sensitive location guidance that remains in effect. So even though there was a new executive order, even though lots of things have changed, that memo from, I think it was 2010, that remains in effect. So if there is an individual who has committed a crime or is targeted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they are not going to go into schools, they're not going to go into medical facilities, they're not going to go into churches, unless there would be some dire need. So if you have an active shooter who also happens to be an illegal immigrant facing deportation or immigration court, then they're going to do that, right, for your public safety. If they're in this building and that was happening, then we would want any officer to come in and assist. So, but generally speaking, they're not going to do that without some much higher authority. There's going to be a severe situation that makes that happen. And then finally, DHS ICE will work with countries involved to ensure proper coordination on the safe and humane return of their nationals. So that's a priority, and that's written right in the executive order. I think that's a positive thing too, that it's going to be coordinated, it's going to be safe for those individuals, and it's going to be humane. So that's all I had about the executive orders. The next piece that the council had asked about was highlighting any difference with the previous administration. And I think I touched on that already a little bit just by going line by line with what I thought you may have an interest in. Eliminating the subcategories or exempt classes of removable aliens. And then, again, that ICE prioritizes removal of public safety and national security threats of those in violation of immigration law, including those who fail to comply with the final order of removal and those who engage in fraud or willful misrepresentation. And I think those are, I think that's really clear. That's how it's working. And then you had also asked about reminding your community and business owners on the basic rules and regulations, do's and don'ts. And this was really good timing. I got a phone call from one of our HSI, Homeland Security Investigation agents today in Kansas City, and I ran this question by him because he actually works on work site enforcement. And his advice was, follow all the rules and regulations in the employee handbook available for download at USCIS. So he was literally throwing the book at us. And he said that one thing I could also you could remind your community of is that the fines have increased from $950 per illegally hired immigrant to $3,000, and that it's quite an incentive to really maintain it. And they are, making sure that those things are enforced and acted on. And here's another positive thing: is he offered assistance. He said if you go to ICE.gov, it's what's called the IMAGE program, or IMAGE, and I don't have the exact what the acronym stands for, but it's HSI offering assistance for internal controls for procedures, policies, and paperwork that make sure that your work site is in line with those regulations found at USCIS. And I think that's even in conjunction with what CIS does as well. So that's everything that I have. It seems like I've been talking forever.
That's how it's affecting our work. And what I was mentioning to you earlier too about secure communities, right? So that's a way of alerting ICE to a custody issue, so that now we know that individual is in that jail. And it's a safer environment. It's much better for everyone if ICE can take custody that way. So some of these jurisdictions are saying they won't cooperate. That's what that means, that they won't let us know when they have a criminal in custody that they're letting go. That's most common. I mean, I'm sure there's some jurisdictions that will write up different ways of saying that.
I am Joseph Larios. I am also with the media, like Mr. Santos. My question is, how many Filipinos have been deported since the implementation of the executive order?
I'd have to look into that and find out for you.
Okay. And how is deportation done? Is it true that if you voluntarily deport yourself, meaning in the case of Filipinos, they have to apply, they have to take the plane. If I pay myself for the trip, so it will save money for the U.S. government. Can I come back? Can I re-enter?
Yeah. Yeah, you can. If you voluntarily choose to leave, yes. And then you can apply for a legal entry while you're in your own country.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, unless you have a prior issue. I mean, if you have some other, if you have committed a crime, right, you have to meet all of the conditions of citizenship or of a visa.
Correct.
But
So what we would look at is whether the person is inadmissible to the United States, precisely because they were removed before and did not voluntarily depart, did not leave of their own accord, for example. There are certainly applications that an individual could make. If they leave the United States, they are inadmissible
how
to
did you
come
say
back.
voluntarily that he was going,
Yes.
right?
But his question is premised on the fact that the person voluntarily leaving is already deportable in the United States. And so, according to immigration colleagues in the foreign countries where we are from, there's a presumption of your intention to migrate to the United States. So, when a person has left the United States after a violation of his visa violation of his visa status,
Okay.
it means he has already broken U.S. law. so the presumption gets stronger when it says, have you been, there are questions here you have to answer.
I see.
Have you been deported from the United States? Have you committed a crime in the U.S.? Have you committed a crime in your home country? There's a lot of them, and if he checks one of them, I think his chances of coming back is closer to zero.
Okay. Well, and I'm not the expert on that, that's theoretical. These two are definitely the experts, so I should have...
So I can speak to a couple of programs that we have in that regard, and that is if somebody is inadmissible to the United States and they want to come back, they can apply to our agency for a waiver of that inadmissibility ground. And generally, this is something that's done overseas. And I mentioned before our main directorates, and I mentioned one of them, the Refugee Asylum International Operations Directorate. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I talked about refugees there, I talked about asylum. I didn't really speak so much about international operations. We do have overseas districts in Roma, Icaca, and Mexico City, and I think we have a total of about 20 some odd field offices, including one in Manila.
Sure.
So those offices do handle certain immigration benefits. I believe the waivers of inadmissibility grounds, though, they used to go through the overseas offices. Now they go through our service centers. So I mentioned that as well. That's where we adjudicate what we can adjudicate on paper. So somebody who's inadmissible under the law to come back to the United States can apply for a waiver if they want to come back to the United States. Doesn't mean we're necessarily automatically going to grant it. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is what's called the provisional waiver process. It's the I-601A, and this is something that was begun a few years ago under the previous administration. And what it allows individuals to do is if they are inadmissible under certain grounds, and they're in the United States, they know that if they were to leave the United States, that would trigger a bar on re-entry. They can actually apply to USCIS for a provisional waiver, so that when they do leave,
They can come back.
they have waiver in hand, exactly. And that was really intended to keep families together and sort of expedite the process of legal migration back into the country for those who we could provisionally approve the waiver.
Is that the same or similar to the parole system? You have to apply for an advance parole if you leave the United States.
So it's different. Advanced parole is simply permission to travel outside the United States
Yes.
and come back essentially in whatever status or situation you had. What we deal with the most in USCIS field operations is advanced parole filed by individuals who have a pending application for adjustment of status. So they're applying for a green card, but they need to travel abroad, and it's what we call the ancillary benefits. When they file the application for adjustment, they can simultaneously file an application for an employment authorization document that's essentially a work permit, and also for advanced parole as the same package. And so most of the advanced paroles are adjudicated at the National Benefits Center, which is part of field operations, but they also adjudicate things on paper like the service centers. In the rare event that somebody has such a dire emergency to travel that they can't wait for that advanced parole to be adjudicated at the National Benefits Center, they can make an appointment to come into our office, and we'll assess whether they have an emergent need to travel. But basically, when an individual gets advanced parole, they get a document called an I-512, advanced parole document, and they can bring that with them outside, and then it allows them to come back, present themselves for inspection at CBP.
So generally then it's
Right, generally it's a year, but I think it's really a case-by-case type.
One question about the ACA. It's in the news wherein DACA, and apparently in the news there was one who kind of applied for that program, obviously in the previous administration, and was ordered to leave the country. And so is DACA then effectively not working anymore, that people should not make the mistake or not going to your office and apply for it only to be on record that you are now targeted for deportation?
So first of all, DACA is one of those paper applications that I mentioned. It's adjudicated at the service centers. The individual has to appear in person to have the biometrics taken because we have to run security checks on them to make sure they don't have a criminal record, for example. But when we approve DACA, what we're really giving somebody is a 2-year work permit and under what we call deferred action. So deferred action is basically a deprioritization of somebody who we know is here illegally. Deprioritization for removal. We're giving them permission to work. That doesn't mean that if they go out and commit a crime, they won't ultimately be removed. But the program is very much still in place. USCIS continues to accept and adjudicate applications for deferred action for childhood arrivals. That's that.
I have another question. On October 28, 2009, Congress passed an amendment to INA, the Section 204I for relief, meaning if I am a petitioner and I petition my wife and children and I died, if I died before October 2009, my beneficiaries and even the children can still apply, because previously, if I die, my petition died.
Yeah, what I'm familiar with is a program called 204L.
Oh, L. I'm sorry.
Okay,
L.
okay. And that's called surviving relative considerations, so that if...
It's more like that.
Right, if the petitioner dies, in certain circumstances, the beneficiaries can continue on the path to adjustment of status. And it's in the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 204L, all the different enumerated categories. But what that's called is surviving relative consideration. And that could come up for our office, for example, in the adjustment of status context. So that's definitely something we look at. It's in the law.
When did it become effective, and how many are there statistics showing that there are hundreds or thousands who have applied when this really...
So I can tell you that 2009 sounds about right. You just mentioned. I was at headquarters at the time and have familiarity with the issue because of that. But I can also tell you that we really don't track in any system the adjudication of cases that are based on that provision of law.
Okay.
Because if you look in our information systems, you'll see an adjustment of status application, but you won't see that it was approved because of that 204L provision.
I am just asking this because it is underreported. Very few people know about it. So,
Okay.
Excuse me, Joseph.
I think
two
that will give a
questions.
chance to others.
Yeah, two
Further
questions.
media.
Two more questions because it's 7:18 already.
okay.
Yeah, from Ms. Please introduce yourself.
Baltazar.
Ms. Baltasar.
Yes. Very quick question. So 2 days ago, there was yet another executive order signed by President Obama that also affects the immigration arena, Buy American, Hire American, that requires or that directs different federal agencies to look into the visa programs to help crack down on abuse and fraud. And while the executive order really is just to review these programs for now, and any changes to the program will require any legislation and rulemaking, has the ball started rolling, and have you seen or received any direction at ICE or USCIS with respect to starting the review of these processes?
So speaking on the USCIS side, I can say not yet. And based on what I've heard, because I listen to the news, I think the way this might impact our agency is through the H-1B program. And I can tell you that I'm very glad I mentioned the service centers, where we adjudicate whatever we can adjudicate on paper, because H-1B petitions, specifically I-129 forms, are adjudicated at the service centers. So this would really impact them more so than in a field office. But as with any executive order, we will look forward to additional guidance as it becomes available.
When the guidance from the executive orders are promulgated, you at the Chicago field office receive it, as well as the service centers, correct? Or is it just directed to the service centers if they're the ones affected?
It really depends. If it has an impact on the field offices, we'll certainly receive guidance from our headquarters. If it only impacts the service centers, I mean, we might receive some notification.
To the service centers, and anything that requires an in-person interview, that's the field offices.
Thank you. So, okay, one last question. Let's give it to Sir.
What precipitated this meeting today is the fact that we are concerned about that executive order way back in January, considering that the first one was challenged in court, of course, in, I think, Colorado and one in the East Coast, and the subsequent revised executive order was also challenged in Hawaii. So what is then, is there a source or kind of some kind of breathing room here that we should not worry meanwhile, because it's under some sort of TRO, that executive order of President Trump. Is it now being enforced despite the challenge in the Hawaii court?
I think some of that is an issue for CBP, because a big portion of those that are in suit right now really affect, entry into the country and exit. So I think that's how I understand it.
And it's likely, based on my reading, again, this is just me speaking, of the second order, it really has to do with the issuance of visas. So that's done by the State Department Bureau of Consular Affairs. We at USCIS have not been impacted. So for us, it's really business as usual. We continue to naturalize new citizens, adjust status, regardless of country, nationality. And the DACA program is still
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. So I know you still have a lot of questions, but we're a little bit constrained with time. We thank again Mr. Chris Brown. Chris Brown is Sydney, right? Chicago Cubs. I know you're a fan, big fan. So I don't mind being interchanged with Chris Brown and Miss Maria del Carmen Rodriguez and Miss Adam Walters. A big hand again for all of them. May I invite Consul General Talonge to please join them for the photo ops. Videography, video editing, and reporting. This is Joseph Gilariosa of the journal Global Links in Chicago, Illinois.